Joining us now is a great friend and a clear thinker and the AI and crypto czar, and also one of the few people that I turn to whenever there is confusion on the Russian-Ukrainian situation, David Sachs. David, great to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time. Also, the All In podcast, all the good stuff. He is a cultural force. David, let's just get back to the facts here so our audience can think about this correctly. What exactly happened? Zelensky launched a surprise drone strike attack into the interior of Russia. Reports are saying that this is 30% of their nuclear potential bombing capabilities. Some people are comparing it to Pearl Harbor. Let's just start there. What exactly factually happened when Zelensky approved this drone strike against Russia?
Well, the Ukrainians started planning this apparently over an 18-month period, or so they said. And what they did is they smuggled in, I think, several civilian trucks that were stocked with drones, and they were able to get them near Russian Air Force bases, some of which were thousands of miles away, all the way on the east coast of Russia. And in a coordinated fashion, they released their drones. They must have smuggled operators into the country as well, because these are not autonomous drones; they're human operated. And I think the operators must have been relatively close to these Air Force bases, and they were able to simultaneously attack several of these bases and attack a number of these bombers that were on the ground. Now, I think the number of about 40 bombers destroyed and 30%, that I think is exaggerated. The articles that I've seen that, again, we don't know for sure, but the ones that I've seen seem to think that around 10 of these bombers were either destroyed or significantly damaged, which is still a meaningful loss for the Russians, but it doesn't incapacitate their bomber fleet or anything like that.
Okay, that's helpful to know. So the people that are saying that this is a precipice of, World War III might be a little bit, leaning in on the over-exaggeration and hyperbole. A couple days prior, David, Zelensky met with an American delegation of Senator Blumenthal and Lindsey Graham. Do we have any evidence that they were tipped off about this and that the Americans were involved on this very significant strike on the interior of Russia?
No, I haven't seen any evidence that would say that the Americans were involved, and the White House has said that President Trump was not notified about it. So I don't have any more information than that. But look, I understand your suspicion.
A level deeper. Yeah, no, I mean, the suspicion is rather glaring, right? I mean, it's just the coincidence, the timing is rather hard to stomach. So, David, then where does this lead us? Is it fair to say that this war is escalating, not de-escalating? And has Russia retaliated against this strike so far?
Charlie, it's definitely an escalation. You recall that during the Biden administration, for a couple of years, they were debating whether to allow the Ukrainians to use American and NATO weapons to launch attacks inside of Russia. And then finally, in the last couple of months of the Biden administration, they allowed such attacks. And it was considered to be a major escalation at the time. And now we not only have attacks inside of Russia, we have attacks on Russia's nuclear triad. By the way, the reason why these planes were out in the open this way, just sitting on a runway, is not because the Russians are stupid or something like that. It's because under the nuclear arms control treaties, START and SALT II, both the U.S. and the Russians are required to keep their nuclear bomber fleets sort of exposed in a way that the other side can kind of count them and see where they are. So, this attack will undermine the nuclear arms control treaties, because the Russians would have to be pretty dumb now to keep their air assets just sitting on a runway like this. So I think this is kind of
such an important point, David. That's super important.
So it is a pretty big escalation here, because the Russians must be thinking, gee, we were really gullible to trust in these arms control frameworks. Obviously the Ukrainians aren't going to respect those. And so now they're going to be incentivized to stop abiding by the terms of those treaties, which is quite unfortunate. So this is an escalation, and, we have to see how the Russians are going to hit back.
And so the question then is, where does this leave the peace talks in Istanbul, and where does this leave the United States of America? This is not the best timing for those of us that want to see an end to this war, as we are seeing this massive drone strike, and then, of course, Russia is saying, well, why are we even abiding by this treaty? President Trump is signaling that he's frustrated with both parties. What is the best possible realistic outcome in the coming weeks that we can expect now that it looks like we're heading towards another summer killing season? Folks, let me tell you about my good friend Todd Nettleton from The Voice of the Martyrs. For over 2 decades, Todd has risked his life to bring attention to the persecution of Christians around the world. Now he's written a powerful book called Faith is Forbidden, detailing his travels and experiences. As a special gift to my listeners, you can get a free copy of this incredible book by simply clicking the link in the description below or call 844-464-3043.
Well, Charlie, in order for there to be a peace deal, there has to be some sort of overlap in what the two sides are willing to accept. And I just don't see what that is at the present time. The Ukrainians have said that they won't give up a square inch of territory. I mean, that's what they've said. And the Russians have said that they are not willing to agree to a ceasefire. They want a permanent peace deal. They think that a ceasefire would be the equivalent of trying to call time out in the middle of a war, and the Ukrainians will just use that time to regroup and rearm and take a losing position and fortify it. So, there doesn't appear to be you might say like a contractual somewhere for the two parties to agree on. Again, the Ukrainians are unwilling to agree to a permanent peace that recognizes this de facto loss of territory, and they still think they're going to win the war. That's what they're saying. And the Russians are unwilling to accept a peace that doesn't address what they call the root causes of the conflict. So I think that President Trump is maybe the only party here who genuinely wants peace. I think he's doing everything he can to try and engineer a peace deal. But I'm not sure that the parties themselves are interested in that deal, or they both want peace on their terms, and those terms are irreconcilable. So I just see the war going on and on. Just to step back for a second, Charlie, I mean, here's my larger frame on the war, is that there's really two wars going on. There's the war of attrition, which is the war that the Russians are fighting, and its purpose is to demilitarize Ukraine. And they're running a very slow, methodical, but ultimately efficient meat grinder operation that is killing roughly 20,000 Ukrainians a month and destroying their war-fighting capability. That's what the Russians are doing. The Ukrainians are fighting a slightly different kind of war. They're fighting a PR war. They want to create perceptual victories that they can use in the media to try and convince their Western backers that this war is not lost, that they can win this war. Because the second that Western support for Ukraine ends, the war is over. I mean, so it's of the highest priority for the Ukrainians to keep the war going by selling these PR successes. And so you saw a really extreme example of this earlier in the year with the Kursk offensive. This was an offensive that ultimately yielded no military benefit to Ukraine. In fact, they lost something like 75,000 men. Hundreds of vehicles were destroyed. And they took hundreds of miles of undefended Russian territory that was non-strategic, and then ultimately they were pushed back. But in the early days of this offensive, it was sold as a big humiliation of Putin that they were able to take Russian territory, and this was sold in the media as a big victory for Ukraine. And then when they were pushed out of Russia, and it in fact turned into a giant rout, that simply wasn't covered in the media. And so this is the type of PR victory that Ukraine has been prioritizing in the war. Now, this attack on the Russian bomber fleet, I would say, is somewhere in between. There is some tactical benefit to Ukraine, and it didn't cost them very much. And it was a surprise to the Russians. The question is just how repeatable it is. If they could do 100 of these attacks, that might impose costs on Russia that could change Russia's behavior in the war. It might actually get Russia to escalate. But in any event, that might be a game changer. But there's no evidence they're able to wage 100 of these attacks. This appears to be more of a one-off that caught the Russians off guard, surprised them, and now they're gonna basically plug those holes. So, what is my point here? My point is that there's a war of attrition going on in which Ukraine is losing and Russia has all the advantages. They have more men, more firepower, more artillery, even more drones, and more of air power. And so the Ukrainians are on a course to basically lose this war. And so in response to that, the Ukrainians are fighting a PR war in which they try to convince their Western backers to keep supporting them. It's a little bit like in the Hunger Games, where the plucky hero has to keep playing to the cameras in order to get the support of the capital. And so this is what you see. You saw Lindsey Graham there at that press conference in Kiev saying, Russia, that Ukraine's going to win this war. I don't. This is Russian propaganda that they're not. And I think the big danger here is just that somehow that what Western publics are given this false sense that this war is winnable, and I just don't think that it is.